I stopped dead in the doorway. It was happening again, just like before. My brother, Victor, was leaning over the hospital bed, his hand hovering near Elise's face as her eyes fluttered open. "Elise," he whispered, his voice smooth and urgent. "Don't trust him, Alex. Your husband, he only married you for the money while you were unconscious." The words hit me, familiar and sharp, like phantom pains from an old wound. This was the exact moment, the exact lie that had destroyed my first life. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the naive younger brother anymore. I remembered everything, the betrayal, the loss, the cold water closing over my head. Victor looked up then, his eyes widening slightly as he saw me. He expected shock, maybe anger. I forced my face into a mask of surprise, letting my jaw hang slack. Inside, my mind was racing, calculating. Let him think he had the upper hand. Let him play his game. This time I knew the rules. It felt like yesterday, though it was 3 years ago in my first life. Victor had cornered me in the study, his usual charm replaced with a desperate edge I hadn't understood then. "Alex, you have to help me," he'd pleaded. "The Joe family. They want a marriage to secure the merger. It has to be one of us." He gestured vaguely towards the city skyline outside the window. "Their daughter, Elise, she's unwell. Comatose." He leaned closer, his expensive cologne suddenly suffocating. "They need someone to marry her, formally. Just on paper. The doctors say she won't last long. 6 months, maybe." His eyes, usually bright with confidence, darted around nervously. "Think about it, little brother. You marry her, wait it out. You become a very wealthy widower. It helps the family, it helps me, and you get set up for life." I was just Alex then, the reliable one, the one who cleaned up Victor's messes. The merger was crucial for the family business, the business our father built, and Victor now ran, mostly into the ground, I later learned. I didn't want to do it. Marry a woman I'd never met, who couldn't even consent? It felt wrong. But Victor painted it as a duty, a temporary sacrifice. He promised it was just a formality. So I agreed. I signed the papers, stood awkwardly beside a hospital bed while a lawyer muttered legal phrases. I became Elise Joe's husband. 3 months later, against all odds, Elise woke up. I remember the cautious hope I felt, the first time I saw her eyes clear and focus. But Victor got to her first. He spun his story, painting me as a greedy vulture who forced a dying woman into marriage for her inheritance, while he, the noble brother, had tried to stop me and was now trying to protect her. Confused, vulnerable, and with fragmented memories, Elise believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was charming, Victor. I was just the quiet stranger who was suddenly her husband. The end of that life was bleak. Victor and Elise, united against me, systematically stripped me of everything. My position in the company, my shares, my reputation. They painted me as a monster. Even my own mother sided with them. I ended up alone, broke, and standing on the railing of the Heiress Bridge. The wind whipped around me, carrying the stench of the river below. I remembered the fall, the impact, the icy blackness. And then, I woke up. Not in the dark water, but back 3 years. The sharp, clean smell of hospital antiseptic filled my nose. I was sitting beside Elise's bed, just hours after signing the marriage certificate. Victor was leaning in, clapping my shoulder. "You're saving my life, little brother," he said, his voice thick with false gratitude. His gold watch, the one I bought him with my first real bonus, flashed under the fluorescent lights. "Really, I owe you one." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Saving his life? He was condemning mine. But this time, I knew. This time, I wasn't the fool. "Anything for family, Victor. I replied, forcing a smile. I met his gaze, holding it just a second longer than necessary. Let him see compliance. Let him underestimate me. In the weeks that followed, before Elise woke up, I didn't just sit by her bed feeling sorry for myself like the first time. I acted. I got copies of her complete medical history, spent nights reading journals, researching experimental treatments for coma patients. I talked to specialists discreetly, using untraceable burner phones. I prepared. When I signed that marriage certificate this time, it wasn't an act of naive sacrifice. It was the first move in a game I had already lost once. This time, I was playing to win. The board was set. The pieces were moving. And I knew exactly where they were supposed to go. Living through this again meant seeing everyone with new eyes. The masks were still there, but now I could see the rot underneath. Victor, my older brother, always the golden child. He could talk anyone into anything. Investors loved him. Women adored him. And I used to worship him. Now I saw the desperation behind the designer suits and the easy smile. I remembered walking into our shared office late one night in my first life, finding him frantically shredding papers. Tiny cuts from the paper edges dotted his fingers, staining his perfect white cufflink just slightly. "Just cleaning house, Alex," he'd said, forcing a laugh, quickly shoving the shreds into a bin. "Getting organized." But I'd seen enough. Letters with threatening red print, loan shark letterheads. His gambling addiction wasn't just a rumor. It was a gaping wound bleeding him dry. He didn't just want the Joe merger for the family company. He needed Elise's fortune to save his own skin. That explained the urgency, the willingness to throw me under the bus. He wasn't just ambitious, he was cornered. This time, knowing that made him predictable. Then there was Mother. She never quite forgave me for being the one who walked away from the car crash that killed Dad, while she was left with scars, both visible and hidden. She doted on Victor, the heir apparent, while I was a constant, uncomfortable reminder. The evening after Elise woke up this time, Mother arrived at the hospital room carrying a huge bouquet of white lilies. They were beautiful, elegant, and intensely fragrant. They were also Elise's most severe documented allergy. I met her at the door to Elise's private room, blocking her entrance. "Those aren't suitable, Mother," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "Lilies trigger severe respiratory distress for Elise. It's in her chart." Her perfectly painted lips thinned into a tight line. She held the bouquet out. "Oh? What a shame. They looked so cheerful." The innocence in her voice was chillingly familiar. In my first life, a similar bouquet, maybe even the same one, had mysteriously appeared by Elise's bedside. The resulting allergic reaction caused a major setback in her recovery, requiring intubation. Victor had swooped in, playing the concerned hero, loudly blaming the overwhelmed hospital staff, while subtly implying my own lack of care. This time, I took the lilies from her hand. "I'll find a nurse to put them somewhere else. Thank you for the thought." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before she smoothed her expression back into one of maternal concern. The game was afoot with her, too. Lawrence Joe, my new father-in-law, was a different kind of player. He was old money, sharp and calculating. He'd agreed to this marriage of convenience because it kept the Joe assets technically under family control through Elise, even while she was incapacitated, preventing hostile takeovers while he maneuvered behind the scenes. He saw the marriage as a business transaction, a way to secure his flank. In my first life, he'd readily accepted Victor's version of events and helped push me out. This time I made a point of connecting with him. I initiated weekly chess games, something he appreciated. We played in the quiet hospital garden or his private study. He was a formidable opponent, his mind as sharp as his tailored suits. During one game, as he captured my knight with a decisive click, he looked at me over his steepled fingers, his eyes shrewd. "You're not what I expected, Alex," he remarked, his tone unreadable. "Oh?" I asked lightly, focusing on the board. "What did you expect?" He didn't answer directly, just studied me. Victor painted a different picture. The unspoken question hung in the air. Was I better or worse than that picture? I knew he was watching me, evaluating. He was a businessman. He respected strategy. I just had to make sure he eventually saw Victor's strategy was flawed and mine was sound. Dr. Chen, Elise's primary physician, was another piece of the puzzle. She was competent, respected, but I knew from my first life that she was compromised. Victor had leverage over her, something about covering up a past mistake, or maybe financial help. She fed him information about Elise's condition and subtly adjusted treatments according to his suggestions, slowing progress just enough to keep Elise dependent and confused, making Victor's narrative more believable. This time, I made my awareness known subtly. After noticing a slight, unexplained adjustment in Elise's medication schedule, one that mirrored a similar event from before, I requested a meeting with Dr. Chen. I also made sure to casually mention to a nurse, within earshot of the doctor's office, that I was having independent security cameras installed in Elise's room. "Just for peace of mind," I explained with a concerned smile. "With Elise being so high profile, one can't be too careful. I'm sure Dr. Chen understands my concern, especially given the unexpected fluctuations we've seen recently." Later, in her office, discussing the medication change, I watched her closely. Her fingers tightened on her tablet. The sharp, citrus scent of her perfume seemed stronger, trying perhaps to mask the faint smell of nervous sweat. She backtracked quickly, blaming a charting error, assuring me it wouldn't happen again. But the seed of doubt was planted. She knew I was watching. She knew I suspected. Her loyalty to Victor was now weighed against her fear of exposure. Finally, there was Wei, my executive assistant. Young, smart, efficient. I'd trusted her completely in my first life. She handled my schedules, my correspondence, sensitive company documents. It was a gut punch when I discovered she'd been feeding information to Victor all along. He'd found her weak spot. Her mother was battling cancer, and the treatments were ruinously expensive. Victor had stepped in, anonymously paying the bills, and in return, Wei became his eyes and ears in my office. This time I set the trap early. I drafted fake meeting minutes detailing fictitious plans for moving personal funds to offshore accounts, something that would look highly suspicious, perfect fodder for Victor to use against me later. I placed these documents in a locked drawer in my desk. Then, one afternoon, while Wei was organizing my files, I accidentally left the key on the desk blotter while I stepped out to take a call, pretending to be engrossed in conversation while watching her reflection in the window overlooking the city. I stood with my back to her, gazing out at the glittering skyscrapers. The silence in the office was profound, but then I heard it. The almost imperceptible rustle of papers, followed by the faint, distinct click of a phone camera shutter. Once, twice. She was quick, efficient, even in her betrayal. When I turned back, the key was exactly where I'd left it, and she was diligently filing papers, her expression perfectly neutral. Good, I thought. Let Victor have his evidence. It would fit perfectly into my larger plan. They were all moving into position. My intimate circle of villains. My brother, my mother, my father-in-law, the doctor, the assistant. They thought they were weaving a web around me. They didn't realize I was the spider this time. The first real move against me came about 3 weeks after Elise woke up. Victor called an emergency board meeting for Joe Corp. I wasn't invited. "Alex, buddy," Victor said when I happened to run into him near the executive suites later that day. He draped an arm over my shoulder, his voice oozing false sympathy. Look, we had a quick board huddle this morning. Just preliminary stuff about the Jensen acquisition. Didn't want to bother you. You've got enough on your plate with Elise's recovery, right? We all agreed you need to focus on her. I saw the pitying glances from the executive assistants, heard the sudden halt in conversation as I approached. Through the frosted glass of the main conference room earlier, I'd seen the silhouettes. Victor gesturing emphatically, Lawrence Joe nodding thoughtfully, other board members leaning in. The air still smelled faintly of Victor's cologne and stale coffee. They weren't just discussing Jensen. They were discussing me. My role, my competence, my trustworthiness. Just like last time. No, you're absolutely right, Victor, I said, forcing warmth into my voice. I even managed a grateful smile. Thanks for covering. Elise is my priority. The company is in good hands with you and Mr. Joe. Later that evening, I joined Victor for whiskey in his office. The expensive bottle, the crystal glasses, all symbols of the success he hadn't truly earned. He poured generously. To family, he toasted, raising his glass. To family, I echoed, touching my glass to his. The amber liquid burned going down, but I swallowed it, along with my anger. I clapped him on the shoulder. Seriously, Vic, I appreciate you stepping up. Managing the company, dealing with this merger, it's a lot. Knowing you're handling it lets me focus entirely on Elise. The relief that washed over his face was almost comical. The tension visibly drained from his shoulders. He thought I was rolling over, accepting my diminished role. He probably thought I was relieved to be sidelined. You've always been the reasonable one, Alex, he said, swirling his whiskey. Level-headed. Dad always said that. He didn't realize my reasonableness was now a weapon, honed by foreknowledge. While Victor tightened his grip on the company, thinking I was occupied playing nursemaid, I was doing exactly that, but differently this time. I spent hours with Elise, not hovering anxiously, but being present. We talked when she felt up to it. I didn't push her about the past, or about us. Instead, I brought things to her. Old photo albums I'd asked her father's staff to find. Pictures of her as a child, laughing with friends, riding horses. I learned she used to play the piano, so I arranged for a keyboard to be brought to her room. One afternoon, sunlight streamed into the room. I played some classical music softly. Pieces her father mentioned she loved. Her fingers, still weak, twitched on the blanket. Do you remember playing? I asked gently. She looked at the keyboard, then at her hands, a flicker of something, memory, frustration, in her eyes. A little, it feels far away. Maybe just touch the keys, I suggested. I sat beside her, guiding her hand lightly. Her fingers trembled as they brushed the smooth ivory. The scent of her jasmine shampoo was faint but distinct. We didn't make music, not really, but it was a connection. A real one, not based on Victor's lies, but on shared moments, patience, and the slow rebuilding of trust. I wasn't just her husband on paper. I was becoming the person who was there, quietly supporting her recovery, helping her find her way back. Meanwhile, my nights were spent differently. While Victor was busy manipulating projections for the Jensen acquisition, a deal I knew from my first life was fundamentally flawed and designed to benefit his hidden creditors. I was digging. Using the access I still technically had and some newly acquired discrete cybersecurity skills, I gathered data. Real data. I documented every inflated projection, every hidden liability Victor was trying to sweep under the rug in the Jensen deal. I compiled spreadsheets comparing his doctored numbers with the actual financials I pulled from secure servers. I created a clear, undeniable picture of his financial misdeeds related to this specific deal. The quarterly review meeting arrived. It was held in the main Joe Corp boardroom. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, panoramic city views. The whole setup screamed power. Victor, at the head of the table opposite Lawrence Joe, was beaming. He presented his restructuring plan, heavily featuring the synergies from the Jensen acquisition. His presentation was slick, full of corporate jargon and optimistic charts. It also involved phasing out several senior executives loyal to the Joe family, replacing them with his own people. He finished with a flourish. "This acquisition, gentlemen, secures our future." Lawrence Joe leaned back, steepling his fingers, his expression thoughtful but cautious. Before he could speak, I cleared my throat softly. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't been expected to contribute, just to observe from the sidelines. "Victor, that's a compelling presentation," I said calmly. However, I was reviewing some figures related to the Jensen deal myself, purely out of interest. I slid several bound copies of my report across the polished table. And I found some discrepancies that might raise concerns about the projected versus actual numbers. Perhaps we should look at these before finalizing any restructuring based on this acquisition. Silence fell. Board members picked up the reports. The rustle of pages turning was the only sound. Victor's confident smile froze, then slowly dissolved. I watched the color drain from his face as he flipped through the pages, seeing his manipulated data laid bare next to the stark reality. His eyes darted towards me, wide with panic and disbelief. There must be some mistake," he stammered, his voice suddenly tight. "My team vetted these numbers thoroughly." "I'm sure they did," I replied smoothly, meeting his gaze across the long table. "But perhaps a second look is warranted, for due diligence." Lawrence Joe looked from Victor's pale face to my calm one, then down at the report in his hands. The game had changed. Round one was mine. Victor didn't take his public humiliation well. He couldn't retaliate directly in the boardroom. My data was solid, and Lawrence Joe had put the Jensen deal on hold pending a full independent audit. So he shifted tactics, hitting me where he thought I was vulnerable. Elise. He and Mother orchestrated what they called a family intervention. They cornered me during Elise's physical therapy session in the hospital's rehab wing. Elise was working on her balance, concentrating hard, when they swept in, faces etched with faux concern. Dr. Chen trailed behind them, looking professional but avoiding my eyes. "Alex, darling," Mother began, placing a hand on my arm, her diamond bracelet flashing under the harsh fluorescent lights. "We're worried about you. And about Elise." Victor picked up the thread smoothly. "The doctors feel... Well, they feel your constant presence might be becoming counterproductive, Alex, creating a sort of dependency. Elise needs space to regain her independence." "Is this true, Dr. Chen?" I asked, turning to the physician. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "Well, Mr. Hayes, intensive recovery sometimes benefits from structured independence, allowing the patient to build confidence on their own timetable." It was vague, non-committal, but it served their purpose. I looked at Elise. She looked confused, uncertain. Doubt flickered in her eyes. They were deliberately undermining the trust we'd started to build, planting the idea that my care was somehow harmful. It was a classic manipulation tactic, and it stung because it used Elise's well-being as leverage. "I see," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I wouldn't argue in front of Elise, wouldn't let them draw me into a fight that would upset her. If that's what the medical team truly recommends for Elise's best interest, then of course. I started gathering the book I'd been reading to her, my bag. "I'll adjust my visits. Evenings only, perhaps?" Victor nodded magnanimously. "That sounds reasonable. We just want what's best for her." I bent down to Elise, who was watching the exchange with a troubled expression. I'll see you tonight, I said softly, kissing her forehead. Then, leaning closer, I whispered so only she could hear, "Trust me." Her eyes held mine for a moment, searching. As I walked out, Mother and Victor flanking Dr. Chen, I paused beside the doctor. "Dr. Chen," I said, extending my hand, "thank you for your professional assessment." As she took my hand, I slipped a small, folded note into her palm. "Perhaps we could schedule a brief private consultation soon? I have some personal health concerns I'd like to discuss discreetly." Her eyes widened, almost imperceptibly, and she quickly pocketed the note. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. My assistant will arrange it." The next day I sat in Dr. Chen's sterile office. The citrus scent was sharper today. I waited until she closed the door. Then, I placed a small, high-quality audio recorder on the corner of her desk, making sure the indicator light was visible. "Dr. Chen," I began, my voice low and calm. "We need to talk about Elise's medication records, specifically the alterations made on October 14th, 21st, and November 3rd, the ones documented as dosage adjustments, but which don't align with standard recovery protocols for her condition, and which coincided with minor setbacks." The color drained from her face. She started to speak, to protest, but I held up a hand. "I know about the pressure Victor put on you," I continued softly. "I know he helped cover up that malpractice issue from 3 years ago at St. Jude's, and I know he's been supplementing your income." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I laid out the specific dates, the specific errors in treatment, the discrepancies I'd found by cross-referencing her orders with the pharmacy logs and nursing notes I'd obtained through means she didn't need to know about. The antiseptic smell of her office seemed to close in. Her career, her reputation, her freedom. It was all hanging by the thread of my silence. The recorder sat impassively on the desk. "I'm not interested in ruining you, doctor," I said. "I'm interested in my wife receiving the best possible unbiased care, immediately." Within hours, citing unforeseen personal circumstances requiring an immediate leave of absence, Dr. Chen had resigned from Elise's case, and shortly after, from the hospital entirely. I had already researched and vetted a team of top neurological and rehabilitation specialists, completely independent and with impeccable reputations. With Lawrence Joe's somewhat bewildered but ultimately trusting approval, backed by my quiet insistence and vague references to ensuring continuity of the highest standard of care, they were brought in immediately. While this was happening, the private investigator I'd hired delivered his first report. Detailed logs and discrete photographs documenting Victor's movements, including several late-night visits to Dr. Chen's private residence, not just her office, and records of untraceable payments made to an account linked to her. More fuel for the fire, if needed. Victor didn't know about the PI, of course. But he knew about Chen's sudden departure. He stormed into my temporary office at Joe Corp the next morning. He bypassed Wei, slamming the door behind him. His knuckles were white around a steaming coffee cup he clearly had no intention of drinking. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice tight with fury. "What did you say to Chen? She's gone, just gone." The steam from his untouched coffee rose between us, a visible manifestation of his unraveling control. I leaned back in my chair, calm. I slid a single photograph across the desk, a clear shot of him entering Dr. Chen's apartment building late one night last week. Then, a printout of a bank transfer record. "Me?" I asked innocently. "I just asked her some questions about Elise's care. Maybe she realized she was in over her head?" I met his furious gaze steadily. "I didn't tell her anything she didn't already know, Victor." He stared at the photo, then at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to figure out how much I knew, how I knew it. He was starting to realize the ground was shifting beneath his feet. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless. He grabbed the photo, crumpled it in his fist, and stormed out, leaving the untouched coffee cooling on my desk. Round 2. Checkmate wasn't far off. Victor was getting desperate. His attempt to sideline me professionally had backfired, and his manipulation of Elise's medical care had blown up in his face. He was running out of angles. So he went for the nuclear option, Elise's inheritance trust. He must have spent weeks poisoning Lawrence Joe's ear, feeding him doctored reports and whispering concerns. I knew it was coming. In my first life, this was the blow that finally took me out. Accusations of mismanaging Elise's vast fortune, leveraging it for risky investments, essentially stealing from my incapacitated wife. This time I walked into my own home. The large, elegant house Lawrence insisted we live in, to find the ambush waiting. Lawrence Joe sat stiffly on the sofa, flanked by 2 stern-faced lawyers I didn't recognize. Victor stood near the fireplace, trying to look solemn and concerned. The air was thick with tension and the lingering aroma of Lawrence's expensive cigars. Papers, financial statements, investment reports were spread across the low coffee table, the one I'd specifically chosen because Elise could easily reach it from her wheelchair. "Alex," Lawrence began, his voice gravelly. He didn't quite meet my eyes. "We need to discuss Elise's trust. Victor has brought some concerning investment decisions to my attention." Victor nodded sadly. "I didn't want to believe it, Alex. But the numbers, they look bad. Really risky plays with Elise's money." I looked at the papers. I recognized the strategy-twisting, legitimate, conservative investments to look reckless, highlighting short-term fluctuations while ignoring long-term stability. It was cleverly done, designed to prey on Lawrence's protective instincts towards his daughter and his fortune. Instead of protesting, I picked up one of the reports, scanned it thoughtfully, and nodded. "I understand your concerns," I said, my voice calm and even. "Looking at these isolated figures, I can see why you'd be worried." I met Lawrence's gaze directly. "These are complex portfolios. Allow me 48 hours to gather the full documentation, performance histories, risk assessments, diversification strategies. I'm confident that once you see the complete picture, your concerns will be alleviated." Victor couldn't hide the flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought I was stalling, preparing to be cornered. Lawrence, though still wary, seemed slightly mollified by my cooperative stance. He agreed to the 48 hours. As they were leaving, Victor lingered at the door, clapping me on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "It's for the best, Alex," he murmured, his gaze already looking past me, no doubt envisioning himself taking control of the trust. "Just sorting things out?" The setting sun cast long shadows across the polished floor as the front door clicked shut, leaving me in the sudden quiet. The final act had begun. I didn't spend the next 48 hours compiling financial defenses. I already had those, meticulously organized. Instead, I made a phone call. "Mr. Joe," I said when Lawrence answered, "could you meet me tomorrow afternoon?" "Alone. There's something important I need to show you. Not about the trust finances, but about why those accusations are being made now." I suggested a location. A small, secluded pavilion overlooking the bay, a place I knew Elise had loved as a child. He hesitated, then agreed. The next day, the salt breeze whipped off the water, ruffling Lawrence's thinning gray hair. The pavilion offered a stunning view, peaceful and far removed from the corporate battlegrounds. I didn't bring spreadsheets or investment charts. I handed him a simple, elegant leather portfolio. "Before we discuss the trust," I said quietly, "I think you need to see this." He opened it. Inside wasn't financial data. It was the culmination of my quiet work over the past months. Copies of Victor's gambling debts, evidence of the loan sharks, records of his payments to Dr. Chen, and the PI's report on their meetings. Copies of the original Jensen acquisition proposal showing how Victor planned to siphon funds. Wei's sworn affidavit, obtained after I confronted her with the evidence of her spying and offered her a way out by telling the truth, detailing Victor's instructions, and finally correspondence from 3 years ago, emails between Victor and his then lawyer outlining the initial plan. Have me marry the Comatose heiress, wait for her expected death, while he maintained a discreet relationship with Elise's ambitious cousin, positioning himself to eventually control the Zhou fortune through marriage after my grieving period was over. Lawrence's hands trembled slightly as he sifted through the documents, the photographs, the bank statements. His face, usually composed, grew pale, then flushed with anger. The sea breeze felt suddenly cold. He planned this? All of it? Lawrence whispered, looking up at me, his eyes filled with dawning horror and betrayal. He saw Elise, even in a coma, as a means to an end, I said simply. He needed her money to save himself. He asked me to marry her, assuring me she wouldn't survive. When she woke up, he needed me out of the way and her under his control. The attacks on my position, the manipulation of her doctors, the accusations about the trust, it was all part of his plan to isolate her and gain control. I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. I didn't marry your daughter for her money, Mr. Zhou. I married her because my brother asked me to. But I stayed, and I fought for her recovery, and I protected her assets, because I realized I needed to protect her from him. The 48 hours passed. An emergency board meeting was called, but it wasn't Victor or his lawyers demanding my removal. It was Lawrence Zhou. The atmosphere in the boardroom was electric. A thunderstorm raged outside, mirroring the tempest inside. Lawrence, his face grim, stood at the head of the table. Victor sat opposite, looking confident, expecting his final victory. Lawrence didn't waste time. Methodically, calmly, he laid out the evidence. Not the trust documents Victor expected, but the contents of the leather portfolio. He presented proof of Victor's gambling debts, his deals with loan sharks, his manipulation of the Jensen deal, his conspiracy with Dr. Chen, his payments to Wei for corporate espionage. Document after document landed on the polished table. Signed affidavits, bank records, incriminating emails. Victor's confident smirk evaporated. He started protesting, denying, sputtering about misunderstandings and corporate sabotage. His denials grew weaker, more desperate, as the evidence mounted, irrefutable, much of it bearing his own signature or digital footprint. He forged these, Alex forged them, Victor finally shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me across the table. He looked wild, cornered. Tell them, Alex. Tell them this is your revenge for me getting the CEO position. I didn't say a word. I simply stood up and turned towards the boardroom doors. They opened silently, and Elise entered. She wasn't in a wheelchair anymore. She walked slowly, deliberately, using a single elegant cane for support. But her steps were steady. Her eyes, clear and sharp, swept across the stunned faces in the room. She looked fully awake, fully aware, and fully in control. She came to stand beside me, and I gently placed my hand over hers on the cane. Lawrence Zhou cleared his throat. As you all know, he announced to the silent room, my daughter, Elise, holds the majority voting shares in this company, inherited upon her coming of age, held in trust during her incapacitation, and now fully under her own control following her remarkable recovery. Elise looked directly at Victor, her voice quiet but carrying undeniable authority. I believe we have a motion on the floor regarding Mr. Victor Hayes's position and fiduciary duties. I vote for his immediate removal and a full investigation. Checkmate? Victor didn't even get to clear his desk. Security escorted him from the building, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His keycard was deactivated before the elevator reached the ground floor. The silence he left behind in the boardroom felt heavy. Elise turned to her father. "It's time," she said softly. "Show him." Lawrence hesitated for only a moment, then nodded curtly to his executive assistant, who had materialized silently at the door. We followed Lawrence, not back to the main elevators, but to a private one I hadn't known existed, accessed with a biometric scan of his thumb. It descended smoothly, going far below the parking garages to a sub-basement level my own access card would never have reached. The doors slid open, not onto a storage area, but onto a state-of-the-art research laboratory. It was vast, humming with the quiet energy of advanced technology. Scientists in white lab coats moved purposefully between gleaming workstations. I recognized some of the medical equipment, advanced EEG monitors, MRI components, but much of it was unfamiliar, cutting edge. Holographic displays shimmered with complex biological data. "This," Lawrence said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space, "is the real Joe family business. Not the real estate, not the shipping fleets you see on the public balance sheets. Those are just diversification. This is the core." He swept a hand across the humming lab. "Medical technology, specifically neuroregeneration and cognitive recovery." My mind raced. The experimental treatments I'd researched, the unexpected speed of Elise's recovery once Dr. Chen was removed. "The breakthrough treatment protocol that helped Elise," Lawrence continued, seeing the understanding dawn on my face. "It wasn't just a lucky combination of existing therapies or some experimental drug sourced from overseas, as we allowed the official narrative to suggest. It was developed right here, decades of research culminating just in time." He looked at Elise, his pride warring with the ingrained habit of secrecy. "Her awakening wasn't a miracle, Alex. It was the first successful human application of the Phoenix Project." Later, back in Lawrence's penthouse office, a different one from the Joe Corp building, this one atop a discreet private research institute, the scale of it all became clearer. The city lights glittered below like scattered diamonds. "Elise didn't just inherit a portfolio of stocks and properties," Lawrence explained, sliding a thick, bound document across his antique desk. "It wasn't a financial report. It looked like a portfolio of patents and research summaries. She controls the intellectual property, the patents, the research team. This work, it will revolutionize the treatment of traumatic brain injuries, strokes, comas worldwide. The potential value isn't just billions, Alex, it's—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Transformative." The leather of his chair creaked as he leaned forward, his eyes, so like Elise's, sharp and assessing. "She told me something interesting, that even before she woke up while everyone else was treating her condition as permanent, you were actively researching coma recovery, looking into experimental neurotreatments on your own." He paused. "You married a woman who doctors said would likely never wake up. You stood to inherit a fortune if she passed away. Yet you prepared for her recovery. You sought out information that contradicted the official prognosis. Why?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. My past life, my foreknowledge. I couldn't explain that, but the actions I took in this life. "Because," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "when I agreed to marry Elise, I took on a responsibility. Even if she couldn't speak for herself, she deserved someone fighting for her best possible outcome. The prognosis seemed too final. I felt I owed it to her as her husband, even if only on paper then, to explore every possibility, no matter how remote. I met his gaze steadily. Hope seemed like the only decent thing to offer. He studied me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod, a flicker of respect in his eyes. The power hadn't just shifted away from Victor. It had shifted towards a future I hadn't fully anticipated, one built not just on revenge, but on unexpected truth and shared purpose. News of Victor's spectacular fall from grace spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles. It wasn't long before my mother appeared at our front door. She arrived looking artfully distressed, tears making clean tracks through her perfect makeup. The familiar scent of her expensive Chanel perfume filled the hallway. "Alex, darling," she cried, clutching my hands desperately. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You can't let this happen to Victor. You don't understand the pressure he was under, the terrible people he got mixed up with." Her voice trembled with practiced grief. "He made mistakes, yes, terrible mistakes, but he's your brother. Family forgives. You have to help him. Talk to Lawrence. Talk to the lawyers." Behind the tears, I saw the calculation in her eyes. It was the same look she used to have when she'd convince me to take the blame for some vase Victor broke or some rule he flouted. She wasn't just pleading for her favored son. She was trying to salvage the family's reputation, her own social standing. "Mother," I said, gently disengaging my hands, "Victor isn't just facing company sanctions. He's being investigated for multiple counts of financial fraud, conspiracy, and possibly violating medical ethics regulations. This is beyond a family disagreement." I looked at her pointedly. "Did you know about the offshore accounts he was using? The ones set up to channel funds from the Jensen deal?" Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, just for a second, before her mask of grief snapped back into place. But she knew. Of course she knew. She might have even benefited. Her silence was its own answer. "Family forgives, Mother," I said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." I showed her out, unmoved by her renewed wave of dramatic sobs. 3 days later, the consequences arrived in person. Victor showed up at our house. Not the polished, charming Victor, but a broken version. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. The police investigation had moved swiftly. His assets were frozen, his accounts inaccessible. His fiancée, the one he'd been seeing while planning to use me, had vanished. His so-called friends weren't answering his calls. He practically fell through the doorway when I opened it. He sank to his knees on the cool marble floor of the foyer, his shoulders shaking. "Alex, please," he sobbed, the words catching in his throat. "I messed up. So badly. The gambling, it got out of control. These guys, they threatened me, Alex. They threatened Mom." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "I was desperate. I never meant for things to go this far, never meant to hurt Elise, not permanently." Rain lashed against the tall windows, a dramatic soundtrack to his breakdown. Elise watched silently from the archway leading to the living room. She wasn't in her wheelchair today, standing with her cane, her expression unreadable but steady. "You're my brother," Victor choked out, grabbing at my trousers like a drowning man. "My little brother. If you talk to them, tell them I was under duress. Tell them I made mistakes, but I'm not a criminal. Please, Alex, help me." I pulled him up, led him to a chair in the living room. I even went to the kitchen and made him a cup of tea, placing the steaming mug on the table between us. I let him talk, listened patiently to the flood of excuses, justifications, pleas, and self-pity. He blamed the loan sharks, the pressure, bad luck, even me subtly for not being supportive enough earlier. When he finally ran out of words, slumping in the chair, exhausted and empty, the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9 times, each stroke echoing in the quiet room. I looked at him, the man who was my brother, The man who had betrayed me twice, who had been willing to sacrifice me and Elise for his own gain. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just a vast emptiness where brotherly feeling used to be. "No, Victor," I said, my voice quiet but absolutely firm. "I won't intervene. I won't lie for you. I won't minimize what you did." The rain outside had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of moon in the clear, cold night sky visible through the window. "You had choices," I continued calmly. "Every step of the way you made choices. You chose to gamble. You chose to borrow from dangerous people. You chose to manipulate me, to exploit Elise, to commit fraud. You had opportunities to stop, to ask for help honestly, to choose a different path. You didn't." His face crumpled completely. The last vestiges of his entitled confidence dissolved, leaving behind the stark reality of his situation. What happens to me now?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. I stood up, gesturing towards the door. "That," I replied, my voice devoid of malice but equally devoid of sympathy, "is no longer my concern." 2 years melted away, smoothing the sharp edges of the past. We stood on a beach, not just any beach, but one in the Maldives, on a private island villa owned by the Joe Foundation for Research Retreats. The sand was powder soft under my bare feet. The setting sun bled colors across the turquoise water, vibrant oranges, deep purples, soft golds. Elise walked ahead of me along the shoreline. Not with a cane, not with a limp, but with a natural, easy stride. Her recovery had been steady, remarkable, fueled by the very treatments her family had pioneered and her own quiet determination. She bent down, her dark hair falling forward, to examine a seashell, her silhouette framed against the dazzling sunset. It was a sight I never got tired of, a daily miracle I never took for granted. Nearby, Lawrence Joe stood partially in the shade of a palm tree, speaking quietly into his phone. Even here he was working, but his tone was different now, less guarded, more collaborative. He was likely finalizing details for the latest grant expansion, bringing the Phoenix Project protocols to more hospitals, making the treatment accessible beyond the wealthy elite. The salt-laced breeze carried the sweet fragrance of plumeria from the villa's garden, where we planned to have dinner later, just the 3 of us, under a canopy of stars impossibly bright and far from any city glow. Our life back home had found a new rhythm, too. We kept a lower profile than the Joe family traditionally had. The opulent galas and high society events held little appeal for either of us. We lived in the penthouse apartment atop the Joe Institute, a place that felt more like a home than the grand house we'd occupied before. Elise had turned the large rooftop conservatory into her sanctuary. Mornings often found her there, tending to her collection of rare orchids, her movements fluid and confident. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, illuminating the lush greenery. I worked from my home office overlooking the city, but my gaze often drifted towards the conservatory, watching her. A quiet sense of peace settling over me. The distant hum of the metropolis 30 floors below felt worlds away, our apartment an island of calm floating above the urban sprawl. We had found our own definition of normal. The Joe Medical Foundation, once a closely guarded secret, was now a globally recognized name in neurological recovery. It wasn't just about patents and profits anymore. Under Elise's guidance, and with Lawrence's support, its mission had shifted. The annual benefit gala was less about social climbing and more about showcasing progress and raising funds for patient access programs. Last month, Elise had stood confidently at the podium, her voice clear and strong as she announced a new initiative providing free treatment protocols to underfunded hospitals in developing countries. The camera flashes illuminated the room as I joined her on stage, our hands finding each other in a subtle squeeze. Looking out at the audience, I saw hope reflected in the faces: doctors, researchers, patients, families. The champagne flutes on the tables were mostly full. People were more interested in the detailed scientific discussions and networking for collaboration that continued long after the formal presentations ended. It felt like a legacy redefined, focused on healing rather than just wealth. Occasionally, news of Victor would filter through indirectly. He'd accepted a plea bargain, reduced charges in exchange for cooperation against the loan sharks and full restitution, which the frozen assets mostly covered. Part of his sentence involved mandatory community service at a neurological rehabilitation center, a place that used a simplified version of the Joe protocols. Someone sent Elise a discreet photo clipped from a local volunteer newsletter. It showed Victor, thinner, his face sobered, helping an elderly stroke patient practice gripping a therapy ball. He looked diminished, but perhaps finally humbled. That evening, as we were getting ready for bed, the city lights painting patterns on the bedroom ceiling, Elise asked quietly, "Do you think he's actually changed?" I thought about it, folding back the crisp linen sheets. Changed? Maybe. Punished? Definitely. Remorseful? Hard to say. I think, I answered slowly, he's learning what it means to serve something or someone other than himself. Maybe for the first time. I paused, considering. That's a start, I suppose. There was no bitterness in my voice, no lingering anger, just a quiet acceptance. His path was his own now, running parallel to ours, but no longer intersecting. The next week marked the anniversary of Elise's awakening. We weren't celebrating with parties or fanfare. Instead, we were hiking a quiet path through the Arashiyama bamboo grove in Kyoto, something Elise had mentioned wanting to do during the long months of her recovery. The towering bamboo stalks created a serene green canopy overhead, filtering the autumn sunlight. Fallen maple leaves carpeted the ancient stone path in shades of crimson and gold, their earthy scent rising with each step. Elise paused, raising her phone not to capture the famous bamboo forest itself, but to take a picture of me as I gazed up at the swaying stalks. She lowered the phone, a thoughtful expression on her face. "When you look ahead now," she asked, tucking her hand into mine as we resumed walking, "what do you see?" The path wound gently uphill, between bamboo that had stood for generations, enduring storms and seasons, a testament to resilience. I thought about my first life, consumed by bitterness and loss. I thought about the beginning of this life, driven by revenge, but standing here, now, with Elise beside me, the future felt different, not predetermined, not something to be feared or manipulated, but something to be built. "I don't see what will happen anymore," I answered truthfully, squeezing her hand. "I just see us, making it happen. Together." Ahead, the path opened into a clearing, bathed in the warm afternoon light. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, the future felt truly, genuinely bright.